Welcome everybody to the first of a series of classes that we're going to be having in the coming weeks on this Monday evening. And we're going to use as our topic for this coming class series this book, newly released book by Paramhansa Yogananda, How to Live Without Fear. And we're going to post in the chat box a link for those of you who'd like to order. It's just recently come out in print form, but I don't believe that's available in India yet. But certainly the Kindle version, the digital version, is available. So if you have the previous books in these series, the Wisdom series of Paramhansa Yogananda, you can now add this one to the collection. For those of you who perhaps I haven't yet had a chance to meet, my name is Nayaswami Jaya, and I'm doing these classes for Ananda India, our online community, but also we post them elsewhere as well on YouTube and Facebook and so on. And it's a joy to be able to do this class series with you because it's a very, very important topic about fear, worry, all of those things that are related to that. And so let's dive into this topic.
No green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend.
Thank you so much. It's a beautiful song. And of course, Swamiji there, it brings to mind, of course, facing ultimately, the final exam as we pass from this body without fear. And of course, that's the state that we have when we have God by our side. But of course, when we're little, when we're born, we tend to have all sorts of fears. We come into this world, the darkness perhaps outside. We don't like the dark. This new world that we encounter as we take up the new life each lifetime, that's perhaps threatening, and we have to learn. And fear serves its purpose because it, in a sense, it's caution, it's apprehension. We have to learn what's going to be helpful for us and what perhaps is a danger. And so it's an instinctive thing to be fearful of perhaps the railroad tracks, the train might be coming, or the cars in the road, or who knows what. And we have to learn these things. And this is, the process of growing up. But what happens is, of course, we're little and we have those fears. We learn and we're no longer afraid of that. But there's always something, isn't there, in life? We go and we become a little bit older. We go to school, all those new classmates we have to meet, and we get into higher education and all those social fears that come in. Well, what about this? How am I going to fit in? Do I look right? Am I properly dressed? Am I going to make a fool out of myself when I have to give my dissertation in front of the class? All of these things start coming, and then we've conquered those, and then we go on, and then we get a little bit older, and then we have to find a job, and oh my gosh, what if I don't find the job or I get the right job, and we get married, and we have children? What about my children? Oh my God. One thing after another, and what goes with that fear, of course, is worry, its companion. Because if it's not immediate right in front of me and I'm facing it, facing this, facing that, one thing after another, we think about it and we worry about it. And we think, what about, it may not be here right now, but it might be around the corner. I knew a lady, before I shifted to India in 2006, I was serving in the east coast of America. We were doing a meditation retreat there for Ananda Sangha in America. And I knew a lady there who, she lived continually in a state of fear. And it was so bad that she would come to our retreat, but she had to summon up her courage to come out of the house to be able to come to that retreat. And I visited her in her house. It was all well stocked, and but she was afraid to go outside. Everything presented a threat. And of course, there are threats in life. There's things we have to, as an adult, we begin to learn, I have to be careful in this or careful with that. But what happens if everything is perceived as a threat? And I use that word perceived because you can see that fear is really, there's a certain reality maybe physically behind it, but it's really the perception of something as being a threat. If we don't perceive it as a threat, now it actually may be dangerous, but if we don't perceive something as a threat, we're not going to be afraid of it. We're not going to perceive it as a threat, so we don't particularly worry about it. So really, it's largely a matter of perception. But what happens if you perceive everything as a threat? Every possibility that comes to mind, it's one threat after the next. And like this particular person that I knew at that time, she would barely go out of her house because something was a threat to her. And it was a sad situation, but there are people in this have these sorts of things. And maybe they're able to summon the courage to function during the daily life, but yet underneath, there's this nagging sense of fear. And like I said when I first started, if it's not one thing, it's going to be another. One thing and another thing, and there's always something. And what happens is, it begins to degrade on us, and you begin to feel threatened. And here's the strange thing. We don't like fear, and we perceive all these things that might be possible. But the thing is, fear and worry in themselves is a form of suffering. And we perceive things as threats because they are a threat to our well-being. In a sense, they're a threat to our happiness, or a sense to our well-being. If those threats actually happen, well, I'm going to suffer. But in the process of fearing them, we've invited suffering, you might say, to come into our lives, and we actually suffer in the meantime too. So we actually, when it happens, we suffer, and when it doesn't happen, we suffer. And we find that this is hardly a way to live, and it degrades us. Now, I want to be very clear here that fear is not the same thing as apprehension or being cautious. Now, if you look at those things, to be fearful is very instinctive. It's something instinctively a reaction. It's like you might say it's very primal. Fear or, flight, the tiger in the jungle, oh my gosh, I see something and immediately it warns me to get out of there, get away from there. So it's a very instinctual, emotional reaction to life. Whereas something like caution is obviously you're thinking about it ahead of time. You're not necessarily worrying about it. It's not nagging at you, but you have learned that, tigers, you have to be careful around tigers. So I'm cautious, but I'm using my intellectual capacity. I'm using my reason. I'm thinking about this. And the same thing, I'm apprehensive. But again, there's a certain balance that has to come into place. And when we lose that balance, when everything is perceived, I'm apprehensive about everything, or I'm so cautious that, I basically begin to become paralyzed in my life. And you could say that it becomes a disease. It's an emotional, psychological disease. This fear has that. We come to a point of imbalance with it where it's no longer serving its purpose. It's overdoing it. And this is what Paramhansa Yogananda said. We find our life becomes it becomes paralyzed. We find our willpower becomes paralyzed, and we find our actions become dictated not by a considered, I've thought about this, I'm going to do this is for my best welfare. It becomes a reaction to life, and we begin to everything we're reacting to it. And I don't think I need to explain this too deeply to you, because I think all of us on some level, we've probably experienced fear. I think we've all experienced fear to some level, at least a little bit, and we can relate to it. But that does raise an interesting question, or raise an interesting point. Is it possible to live without fear? And I think it is, because it's been demonstrated that there have been people who have been fearless. I remember years ago, I was at a satsang that was being hosted by Swami Kriyananda, and this was at Ananda Village many, many years ago. And I remember Swamiji saying something, and I only heard this, he only said this one time, that in my presence at least, he never said it again. And it was, I'm guessing it was maybe 1976, 75, anywhere, somewhere in that time frame. And somebody was asking him at this satsang about fear, about how to overcome fear, and he was talking about it, and various examples were being given to him, and he was trying to answer them as best as he could. And then he paused a moment, and because he didn't feel he was doing a very good job of answering these persons, because they kept coming back, and he wasn't explaining it, and they weren't getting what he was trying to say. And he says, I'm sorry, he says, I'm having a hard time answering your question, because honestly, I've never in my life known what felt fear for myself from personal experience. And then he would sort of said it very offhandedly like that, and then went on. And I thought, now that is interesting. And then I began to watch and observe, and he was not ever afraid of anything. And the social situations, certainly not. He was not in the physical situations. No, he would be if something would come up, he'd be the first one to walk forward and deal with it, whatever it might be. Now, did that mean he was careless? You have to drive the car. You do it the right way. It's not, you're not going to be reckless. No, he did it, went about his business properly, but he never had that emotional reaction, you see, that emotional reaction that came with being fearful. Now, we're going to explore that, about what that emotional reaction is all about and how to perhaps emulate that, but not today, because this is a class series and we're going to come to that in the weeks ahead. How do you face life? How is it possible to be fearless? Well, obviously, I'll give one example here, and this is one of my favorite stories I've always remembered about this topic. And how is it possible? Well, it seems that in ancient times, and this is in Korea, and that there was a warlord rampaging the countryside, and he and his army were conquering all villages throughout the countryside, and his army was approaching a local village, and this local village, in the middle of it, there was a temple there. And in the temple, there was a priest who took care of the temple and went about the daily activities as priests do. And he was noted to be very calm and very centered. Well, as the army of this rampaging warlord was approaching the village, they were razing all the villages and destroying all the inhabitants if they could catch them. The villagers came to him and says, "Quick, sir, we must leave immediately. The warlord is just about here. The army is on our doorstep." And everybody left except the priest. He maintained, he heard this and he thought about it, and he said, well, and he went about his business as doing the various things of taking care of his temple. The general of the army, the warlord, comes and, begins to raze the village, and he comes to the temple and he walks in and he sees that this priest is still here, and he says, "You're still here." And the man says, "Yes, how may I help you?" And it was very straight matter of fact. And the warlord is just stunned. He says, "Do you realize who I am? I am the man who can run you through with the sword without blinking an eye." And the priest was very calm. And he says, "Well, it's good to know. Do you know who I am? I am the man who can let you run your sword through me without blinking an eye." And the general was taken aback. But he was a wise enough general that he pronounced, so, and he let the priest be. Now, what was the quality of that priest? He was fearless. Now, he did not have fear. Now, how is that possible? Well, this is, of course, what we want to explore. And but that's next week. I'm going to go. We'll take that up next week more. This week, let's explore this topic of fear, because it comes in all shapes and sizes. And like I said right at the beginning, it's if it's not going to be one thing or another. But this is the insidious thing about fear. We're afraid of something. We perceive life, and it could be anything, really. It paralyzes us. And the insidious thing is that the more we feel that things, it begins to actually attract that which we fear. Now, isn't that interesting? You can see this begins to happen because fear is an emotional reaction, a very strong emotional action, and it originates, of course, in perceptions and fearful thoughts, and we actually begin to attract it to ourselves. Even that which we fear, we somehow find ourselves attracted to it, because you could say there's many reasons for this. Because what we fear is somewhat, the soul doesn't like to be fearful. This is something you could say degrading to us. And on a deeper level, we don't want it. And those things we really, really do not want, we're attracted to them because we want to overcome those things. We want to get rid of that. It's just as you could say the reverse of those things that we highly desire, which is also an emotional reaction to life. It's those things that also draw us to those things we really, really want, and those things that we really, really, really don't want have magnetic power. And thoughts themselves, they originate in the form of thoughts. And thoughts have a magnetic power and actually begin to draw to us. And now there's a quote by Paramhansa Yogananda I want to share. He says, "Fear develops in an individual a malignant magnetism by which he attracts the very object of which he is afraid, as a magnet attracts a piece of iron and steel." And so you could say fear and its companion, worry, they strengthen the subconscious mind at the expense of the conscious mind. And this is why it's degrading for the devotee, because what we're trying to strengthen the conscious mind, and ultimately, of course, from the conscious mind, we can begin to open the door to superconscious insight, superconscious drawing, superconscious solutions to our problems. But fear paralyzes us, and one of the ways It paralyzes us from acting. It paralyzes the conscious mind to come up with solutions. And fear also strengthens the subconscious mind. And so you could see it's going in the exact opposite direction that we want to go as devotees, as not to speak of just devotees, people wanting to evolve in a more conscious way and wanting to reach their own highest potential. So it paralyzes us from taking positive action. You can see the tiger is so afraid you can't act. Have any of you ever had that situation where something happened and all of a sudden you're just frozen in not a pleasant feeling? But it paralyzes us, not just bodily, mentally, and from taking action, a positive solution, but it degrades our will also, which was one of the reasons we find ourselves paralyzed. And you could say it squeezes out your will, your vitality. And of course, ultimately, where can there be solution consciousness or intuitive perception of a solution when you're frozen like that? So be cautious is what Paramhansa Yogananda said. Be cautious and apprehensive, but that's based upon a true, clear perception, because we are responsible for this vehicle, this soul vehicle, this body, our place in this world. It's proper to be properly cautious and apprehensive to the degree that it's in balance with why we are given this in the first place, this ability to feel a little bit fearful, and it's a self-preservation, you might say. And so we have that responsibility, but we want to think of it in this way. Why are we fearful? We're afraid we're going to suffer. Something's going to happen to this body. But you could say it's the same thing. We maintain proper caution with our house. We don't, if fire season, I have to make sure to clean all the leaves and the brush from around the house so that it doesn't catch on fire. I treat it with respect and with a proper awareness of the conditions in which my house is living. I'm in the forest, so I don't play with fire. I have to be properly. And if I live where tigers are, then maybe I want to, be properly prepared for the tigers, or whatever it might be. We live in cities. There are tigers in the cities too, but they take different form. Use proper, and Paramhansa Yogananda, and he said, be fearless. But he didn't say to be mindless, to take proper caution when caution was necessary. Like he kept warning a lady in his congregation to lock her car. And she says, oh, God will take care of me. I don't worry about it. And sure enough, there was one time her and her friend, they had left some very expensive jewelry in their car. They went about their business. They didn't lock the car. And a robber somehow knew that and came and stole many thousands of dollars worth of jewelry out of her car. And she says, well, why did God didn't protect me? And Yogananda was saying, just shook his head. He says, well, you didn't use proper caution. Now, to use proper caution, you then don't have to worry about it. You see, no, they didn't have to worry. She didn't lock her car door, in other words. And so consequently, he was saying, be mindful of your situation. Be properly mindful. And use your perception in the way it's meant to be used in perception, and then act in the way that we're supposed to act, appropriate to the circumstances we find ourselves. And this is how Swami was. But you don't need to be, out of balance with that. And you don't need to feel fear. Actually, this brings, you could say, one of the solutions is to be properly prepared so that you perceive correctly. And what that does is it builds confidence. And we're going to go into that, not this week, but next week. How do we build that confidence within ourselves? Because with confidence, you can face anything. You can develop courage, which is, again, another solution. And ultimately, like that priest in the temple, you can reach that state of fearlessness? What does it take to be able to get to that point? And of course, a clue that we're going to explore is being non-attached to this body, you could say, but being properly careful for it, but be non-attached to what happens. And then ultimately, of course, having a divine companion in facing. How can we face all these things? And if you know you're in, you could say, in divine hands, it gives you that confidence to act properly. And we begin to attract to ourselves those things that are going to be helpful for us to be able to face life's challenges. I remember there's a saying from one of America's presidents many years ago, Franklin Roosevelt. He came into the presidency during the time of the Great Depression in 1932. And he gave his inaugural speech. People were facing very difficult situations. There was social fear that, oh my God, what's going to happen? People were being laid off their jobs. And it was a very bad economic time for the country, the United States at that time. And one of the phrases he used, he says, don't be afraid. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, you see. Because fear will paralyze us. Fear will not allow us to find the solutions and that we need, and particularly for us as devotees. Fear, worries, they drive out our ability, or they close the door, let's say. They close the door on our ability to hear divine guidance. It's like we've pulled the veil over ourselves. And so let's explore these next week. And you could say, broadly speaking, the solutions are what not to do, and you might say the attitudes that perhaps prevent us from or induce fear, and you could say obviously the opposite of that is what should we do, what types of attitude, what practices we do. And I want to conclude here today with a prayer. And a prayer is and this is Paramhansa Yogananda, or you could look at it as an affirmation also. He'd say, remember, always say to yourself, pray, says, I am protected always. For the living God goes with me everywhere on the altar of my ever-remembering devotions. And so let's come back next week. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore solutions, courage, non-attachment, confidence, and getting right perspective, environment, all of these things. And as we go along, this week and next week, you probably are going to have questions. Now, I'm not going to invite questions this week. I will because this is, you might say, an introduction to the topic. So let's go a little bit more deeper into it. But questions will arise, and when they do come, you can send them in to the online community, Bharat and Chamonix, and they'll forward them on to me if they're general questions. If you have something very specific, you can ask them to send it to me. And also, you can put them always in the chat box as well. And each week I'll try to address a couple of questions. But then at the very end of the series, we'll also then at that time have, you might say, one class. If there are questions, and this is up to you to be able to submit them, if there are questions, we'll devote the last class session mostly to questions, so we catch up on all of them. So I look forward to seeing all of you next week, and let's go deeper into this and think about it in your life. What is it that I'm afraid of? How can I how can I face those? How can I develop confidence to overcome these things? And let's see if we can share together and find answers. God bless all of you, and until next week, joy to you.